But if there's one solid main kind of feature that CATS offers, and frankly, if you're not using it, you're not getting the most out of the product, it's our workflow. So it's the ability to sort of automate your hiring process, the different steps in your hiring process, and tailor it to your own unique setup that you have. So that's why we're diving into the workflow today as part of our sort of renewal of our monthly training webinars that we're doing. Some of the things that we're going to cover today in that workflow is adding and editing statuses. We're also going to dig into using triggers. A few of those different trigger types we'll take a look at. One of the cool things that doesn't get used a ton, and I would love to see more adoption, is using multiple workflows. So I can say, okay, for this particular job, these are the steps that I want to take. For this particular candidate, these are the steps that I want to take, or not candidate, but let's say job, or for clients. You can create multiple workflows. That's one of those let's walk before we can run type of things, but it's a really cool feature that we have. And then once those workflows are built, we'll talk a little about using mass actions to change multiple candidate statuses at once, so you can really start to kick that automation into high gear. And we'll also dive in a little bit into adding third-party services as part of your workflow. So ordering things like background checks, or sending them off to an HR system, things of that nature can be done through your workflow. All right, and I'm going to pause the screen share and switch gears here, and we'll dive right in. So bear with me one moment here. All right, the joys of doing this live. Cool. All right, so again, this is going to be, as far as setting up your workflows, a majority of this is going to be an administrative function. So if you don't have admin access in your system, it might be something you would either want to check with your admin, or let them know, hey, there's this cool feature in CATS. I don't think we're using it. Here's how you do it. Here's this video. So to get to it, I'm going to go to settings. I'm going to go to administration, and then workflow. Now, depending on your site, there might just be one workflow up here. It'll say general, or as I sort of alluded to before, you can create multiple workflows. For now, we're just going to focus on this one that says general. And again, there's kind of a lot going on here, but the basic idea behind the workflow is that the steps, the title of those steps are over here on the left. And the general idea is that a candidate, depending on how they come into your system, or depending on how they ended in the job, will start up here at one of these new candidate statuses, and they're going to kind of work their way down. Contacted, maybe we send them a phone screen, maybe we send them off, for an interview, or maybe they go straight from a new candidate into not in consideration for whatever reason. You're not locked into moving them down every single step in your workflow as part of your hiring process. So you've got flexibility there. Now, if I want to add a new status, I can come up here. There's a button that says add status, and I can go crazy on the colors. I did want to touch on the mapping a little bit. So the mapping, and again, without diving too deep into this, two things that you're going to touch on. One is it's a way to sort of group your statuses together. Maybe I have three different sort of interview statuses that I send my candidates to. One's a phone interview, one's an in-person, and then one is, with the board of directors. Okay, all of those statuses can be mapped as interviewing, and that gives me the ability to say, okay, in this job or over this amount of days, show me everyone who was sent to any of my interview statuses. And so that's one way that those can go through. The other thing, as I mentioned, is for mapping. There's a number of built-in statuses or reports rather, where we're going to consider the mapping for those statuses when we look at doing things like placements and interviews, things of that nature. And then the other thing that you can do is you can set prereqs for your statuses. So I mentioned before, as a candidate comes through your system, as they apply for a specific job, maybe they start somewhere in this new candidate, but maybe you've got several interviews set up and you want to make sure that we're not submitting anybody until they've been contacted and phone screened first. And so I can basically say, I'm going to call this status interview 2. And by setting these 2 as a prereq, I'm not going to be able to change a candidate to this status until they've been contacted and phone screened first. So it's a nice little bit of damage control potentially as candidates are going through your system. And again, the idea is they typically start somewhere at the top, they work their way down to the bottom. All of these existing statuses, I can sort of click and drag and move around. For those new users in the system, we actually will start you off with there's just kind of a general 8 status workflow that looks somewhat like this. Feel free to use those, add new ones, delete the whole thing and start over. Again, this is very, very much up to you in terms of what these steps are and specifically what they do. Okay, and that's where we start talking about triggers. So again, on the left is what it's called. On the right, under this triggers column, is what it does. Now, a status doesn't necessarily have to have a trigger. I've got this one in here that's called contacted, and the intent for that one is basically to say, I've looked at this person, I've talked to them, not ready for a phone screen just yet. So, let's just wait for next steps. So there's no trigger on that one, but it does give me the ability to differentiate a new candidate versus someone that's been contacted. More specifically, I can add triggers to these statuses to make things, to use a technical term, happen as a result of changing a candidate to that status. So for example, on this phone screen status, I've got it so that it sends an email to the candidate that says, hey, thanks for applying. I would like to jump on a phone call with you. Here's a link to my calendar. Let me know what time works best for you. And that's another great feature within CATS is our meeting scheduler if you haven't used that. And then automatically, as I change a candidate to that status, it's going to go to them. And I can add multiple triggers to a given status as well. So on this phone screen one, for example, I've got it to where I can also create a task to follow up with candidate. Let's say I don't hear back from them within a few days. I'll see a task come up in the system. This workflow was actually built a long, long time ago as a way to automatically update candidates with any sort of movement that was going on as they were going through the workflow. Our recruiters, we were actually a recruiting company if you go back far enough, and they got, frankly, they got a little bit tired of candidates just constantly bugging them. Hey, any movement yet? What's the update? Where am I? How do I stand? So this thing was built out to say, hey, look, when we know, you'll know, because you're automatically going to get emailed when you move forward. So that's a very basic but very powerful tool that you can have. Look, I changed your status. Here's where you're at now. I'm going to send you an email. The other thing that you can do, another thing you can do rather, is send submittals out to hiring managers, decision makers, HR people, whomever you see fit. So when I'm adding a trigger, by default, we've got this one that says email. If I hit that drop down, I've got a number of other options here. Submit them to client. I can create a task like I talked about before. I can send an SMS message, which we'll talk about here in a bit. For the submit to client, I can build out a templated email that's going to contain any information that I would want to pull from that candidate's profile. It's automatically going to attach a copy of their resume. And it also gives the reviewer the option to leave some notes and hit an approve or a decline button. So from the person that was receiving this email, it looks something like this. Again, this is that templated email that comes out. I can build this to contain any information that I would want it to contain. And then there's a link here to review the candidate. And here is Jake's resume, and I can say, looking good. Type some notes in here. And I can hit the approve button. So it's a really good way, pardon me, it's a really good way to send those reviews out to the folks that are in that particular step in your hiring process. Now, there is an additional step that you can take that sort of intertwines with the workflow, where you can actually send out, in addition to just sort of the resume and some notes, we've got the ability to send out custom scorecards as well. Now, this would need to go to a user within your system, be it a hiring manager or another user within CATS. But in lieu of, again, this particular space where they're just seeing the resume and the place to leave notes, it's going to look a little bit more like this, where they can actually rate candidates on certain categories that you choose. And then again, same thing, they can approve, they can decline. There's a copy of the resume that'll appear as they go through that as well. So again, submittal step, another great tool within the workflow that you can use. And the other thing I talked about as well was adding a text message. Great way to sort of double up your efforts to reach out to your candidates. So let's say on this phone screen status, I want to shoot them an email and say, hey, saw your application came through, looked really good, let's talk. But at the same time, I also want to shoot them a text message, and that can contain the exact same template that I had in that email. It's got a link to my calendar embedded within that message that goes out. So again, another good way to reach out to your candidates automatically. Now, I did want to take a step back a little bit. When we talk about workflows, I mentioned sort of off the top, I can create multiple workflows. Now, I've seen this used for different job types. I've seen this used for different clients that you can send the jobs to, even individual users within a site that have their own templates, their own emails, their own sort of steps that they want to use. I've seen that used as well. And so let's say I've got a workflow set up for entry level. Let's have a quick phone screen, maybe have them come in for a face-to-face, and then it's done. And so I can set up an interview that's very specific to that. Or let's say I'm hiring executives. I've got a very in-depth, very built-out, C-level type of workflow that has multiple interviews and multiple submittals. I can do that as well. Essentially, I go into a job, or I can do this as I'm creating the job. And there is a space right here that says pipeline workflow. And as I edit that, hit the drop down, that's basically going to tell me, here's the available workflows, and I'm not sure the screen share is showing this. You'll have to trust me on it. But it basically has all the workflows that I had listed on that previous page here. And so I can choose, all right, this one's going to be my Acme Corporation workflow, or this one's going to be my sales workflow. So again, once you sort of get the hang of building workflows, adding those triggers, you can then potentially build out additional custom workflows based off of things like jobs, clients, candidates, users, things like that. All right, and one of the things I really, really, really love to show that really kind of starts to harness the power of automation and using those custom workflows is using mass actions to take those steps for multiple candidates at once. Now, what I can do, if I'm looking at this digital marketing specialist position, I can take a look at my candidates. Maybe I'm going to throw a filter on here that says, okay, only show me my new applicants. So I've got like 10 people here that I want to review. I'm going to pop out this little preview window where I can sort of start to cycle through my different candidates over here. And then as I'm doing this, I'm going to say, you know what? I liked Helen. That Zach guy, he's no good. We're going to skip him. We'll go with Isaiah, Alicia, and I'm just clicking names at random here. John, Simon, Mike, whatever. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So here's 7 people that I'm thinking, you know what? based off your resume, I think we're looking good. Let's go ahead and take a next step. So what you can do, if I just wanted to send this to one person, I can click over here where I'm looking at the status, and I can say, all right, I'm going to change this person right here to a phone screen. And I'm going to send that email out that basically I built out on that workflow settings page that we were looking at before. And that's all well and good. That's for one person. But what I can do, as I check these boxes, I can say, all right, so for these 7 people, I'm going to click right up here where it says change status. And I'm going to say phone screen just to stick with that same example. And right here, I'm going to check the box that says email. And now what that's going to do is that's going to send 7 emails, 1 to each person. Those emails are BCC'd. No panic there. Mike doesn't know that Alicia doesn't know that Brad all got essentially the same email. They're BCC'd. Now those are going to be personalized. It's going to say, dear Mike, dear Alicia, saw your application. Again, you can include those tags in those email templates to contain personalized information on the candidate, on the job, yourself. And then I just happen to have in that email a link to my calendar to where it says, hey, here's when I'm available. Go ahead and book a time that works for you. And so now 7 people I didn't have to try to play phone tag with. I didn't have to try to copy and paste 7 different emails that go out. I can see all at once that these people went to this step as far as my logged activities. So again, it's one very specific example, but it's a very good one, I think, that shows how you can really start to automate, how you can really start to just take multiple actions at once based off of really a couple clicks once you get that sort of workflow set up. All right, and one more quick thing I wanted to show you guys. I mentioned sort of off the top that you can add third-party services to your workflow as well. And this is, it's hard to go into specifics here because there's so many different things that you can kind of do. So to start, on the back end, there is a place, again, this is an admin only function, but if I hit settings, administration, and I'm going to go to integrations, which is the 4th one from the top here. So there's a number of parties that we partner with: Bamboo HR, Checkr, Constant Contact, Slack. Over here, we've got a Slack channel set up so that when people apply, we have a hiring channel in our Slack setup so that when people apply, it includes a link over to them, so sort of our hiring panel can go review them instantly as they come through. So Slack's a really cool integration that we have. Again, and there's a number here. And as you go in and start to set these up, like Constant Contact, for example, it's going to ask for your login information, things of that nature. But once you get those set up, the idea is I'm going to tell Katz, okay, once a candidate reaches this point in my workflow, I'm going to blank. I'm going to send them to whichever third-party system that I have set up. So before, where I was adding a trigger, this is where some of those will start to come through. So for example, let's say I'm using Bamboo HR on the back end for my payroll, time tracking, PTO, things like that. I can make it so that if I hire a candidate, so right here when I place them, boom, I've got a tag right here to add an employee to Bamboo HR. And taking a look over the questions over here. Yeah, so as far as paying for some of the third-party integrations, most of them you wouldn't have to pay for the integration, but you would have to, Bamboo HR, you would need to create a Bamboo HR account and pay for that. So we're just sort of combining the two together. Same with Constant Contact or MailChimp. I think they have free options and those will work. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that's going to be, yeah, it's just I'm paying for this over here. I want to connect it to this thing over here type of thing. One other thing that I would really love to show you guys, but I could do a whole webinar on it, is Zapier. So we've got a Zapier integration as well. And that sort of takes this thing to a whole new level. Honestly, it's one where, okay, I have these integration settings here where these are sort of like our built-in integrations. What Zapier does is I can essentially make it so that, okay, I'm reaching a point in my workflow where this thing is happening. It sends some information over into Zapier. Zapier then sort of acts as okay, cool. Well, I'm going to hook this thing up to this thing, and it allows you to sort of integrate with, hundreds of different things, platforms out there that we don't necessarily have built in. And coming soon, we're going to do a webinar specifically on Zapier and how to get that hooked up. Not really enough to talk about it specifically in the in the webinar for workflow specific things today, but I would highly encourage you, if you haven't yet, check out our knowledge base. There's actually a really good article on Zapier that kind of breaks down how to set up the initial steps of that integration. And while you're here, this is a really good place to sort of review a lot of what we talked about today. So customizing the workflow, adding statuses, triggers. There's a nice little video that walks you through it with way fewer words than I have today. So our knowledge base it is available within CATS. So if you click on the question mark here, there is a link to it right there, as well as a link to those training videos. In that knowledge base, one more thing I did want to show you guys. There's also a link to our upcoming webinars. So next month, we're going to dive deep into job applications and the career portal. Yeah, and honestly, I would love to take a quick look at Zapier. There's a video here that we did some time ago as well that sort of breaks that down. So if you are interested in that Zapier piece, there's a good place to look there as well. All right, what are we at? 25 minutes, nailed it. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a moment. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to let those questions sort of come through. We'll finish up with a Q&A for a good 10, 15 minutes here. I will get to as many as I can. And like I said, if I don't get to you, we'll follow up via email. So I'm going to take a sip of water and we'll start answering those questions. Go ahead and start sending those through. Appreciate it. All right, that works for me. Thanks so much. There are way more questions than we'll be able to get to in this space, but I will do my best to get to as many as I can. So Todd, you had a really good one. I saw on the workflows a checkbox that was either empty, had a green check mark, or a black asterisk. What does the asterisk mean? So when I'm setting up those workflow steps, there's a required setting that can happen on those. So as I'm putting a trigger on a status, that's where these come through here. So I can set a trigger to required, which basically means As soon as I save this workflow, as soon as I change a candidate to that workflow, this trigger is going to fire. I cannot make it not happen. and I'll show you this in practice, so it'll make a little more sense. The other setting is it's optional, but it's on by default. So I change a candidate status, and by default, this email is going to go, but I have the ability to uncheck the box. And then, you know, the other option is optional off by default. So I can change the status. The ability to send that email, for example, is going to be there, but unless I actually go in and check the box, it won't go. So to show you that in practice, if I go back into that digital marketing specialist job, as I change a status, let's say to phone screen. So this is an option of one that is optional and off by default. Now, if it were optional and on by default, it would basically look like this when that pops up that says, yep, that's going to be here automatically. And if I hit save, it's going to send it out. But I can also undo it if I decide I don't want to send the email for that particular person, but still change their idea. And then the other option would be required. Basically, this would be checked and it would not give me the ability to uncheck it. So great question. That is, so when you see like the asterisks listed out on the workflow settings page, that's basically what that means. It's telling you, is it required? Is it optional, on or off by default? And if I hover over that, so the asterisk is required, green is optional on by default, and optional off by default is just sort of that gray box there. All right, let's jump back in here. Tom, does CATS have a third-party relationship for Click to Dial? Tom, we're so close. we use RingCentral on our end to pull back the curtain a little bit. And one of the things that we did very recently was that if a candidate has a phone number listed, we basically made it like a tel link, so that if you do have RingCentral built in, all you have to do is click that number and it'll automatically dial it for you. There's also a browser extension that RingCentral provides that will do essentially the same thing. I just click on a phone number and that's going to come through. The only place we sort of fall short at the moment is, okay, I can make that call, but there's no automatic logging that happens within CATS. Can't give any sort of promises or timelines, but we've heard that you're not the first one. So soon is my answer to that. I can't say if it's going to be a week, a month, or a year, but it's definitely something that we're looking at. All right, let's dig out a couple more here. Okay, Gabriella had a question. Does CATS have a type of Calendly meeting, an online appointment scheduling where I can synchronize directly events meetings to CATS? We do, and I'm so glad you asked that. That's kind of what I mentioned before. So yeah, Calendly, I think is kind of what you were referring to there. We copied them. I mean, we have a very similar type of product setup to where you've got email sync and you've got calendar sync that's set up in here. Now, what I can also do is set up, we call it the meeting scheduler within CATS. And so each individual user is going to have this where I can go in and I can make configurations as far as what days and times I'm available, how much buffer time I need, things like that. I can set the URL. And then essentially, it kind of looks like this, where I can send this link. When I was showing that phone screen email trigger that was going out, it contained a link that went over to my calendar like this. So this is a great way to schedule phone calls, interviews, meetings, things of that nature in an automated fashion through CATS. So yeah, each individual user is going to have that. This is going to talk, you essentially have a CATS calendar that's going to talk to your Outlook or like your Gmail calendar. So typically you want to make sure that this is hooked up before you jump into this meeting scheduler. And at any point, if you're having any issues with that or would like a walkthrough, again, great resources here for our support team. Shoot them an email. Phones are back, which I'm super, super happy to report. If you guys within CATS click that question mark, we've got a request to call option in there now. So if you want to kind of walk somebody to help walk you through that, we monitor that just like we monitor the email. And so you'll get a link back really quick, basically with one of these that says, hey, look, here's when I'm available for a call. Let's go ahead and get that booked. So, but other than that, again, the knowledge base, the training videos, both have very in-depth articles on creating those and editing those specific features. All right, let's do, oh my goodness, let's do one more. Yeah, so we had a question specifically about multiple workflows. So if we use multiple workflows, will I be able to use a different workflow for each job? Will it affect my job/candidate report? Yeah, I mean that's kind of the design behind the multiple workflows. Is again, I can create those different workflow steps. Again, be it for a job, be it for a specific client, company that you're working with, and then within the job itself, you're going to see a setting over here that says pipeline workflow. And essentially I can just choose from this drop down which workflow that I want to use. Now, if you already have candidates in the pipeline for this job, they're going to stick with the same workflow that they were on. So if I had workflow A attached to a job and I had 10 candidates in that pipeline already, their workflow steps aren't going to change. They're going to continue on that same path that they were on. But from the time that I put workflow B onto that job, any other candidates that are into the pipeline, they're going to move forward with that next current workflow, I guess, that you have on there that you made the change to. All right, and I think Jeff's answering some of these on the back end too, so big thank you to Jeff. Okay, guys, that is, we're just about at time here. So I want to thank you again so much for hopping in today. We're going to be doing this once a month with a different topic coming up each month. I mentioned before, we are going to take a deep dive into customizing job applications and the career portal. That's coming up next month. So I hope you will all join me for that. In the meantime, again, a number of ways to reach out to us. If you have any specific questions, hit the support question mark right up here. Shoot us an email, request a call. I do personalized trainings. If you want to get a bunch of your team members together, we can get that set up. A lot of options for reaching out to us. So again, email of this recording coming your way either later today or tomorrow. And then any questions that we didn't get to within the webinar here, we're going to go ahead and answer those via email. So we got an afternoon ahead of us, Jeff. All right, guys, we're going to end it for today. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next month.